And hello, everybody. I'm Rick Dancer. Welcome to Get Real with Rick Dancer. It's nice to have you here. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. It's not necessarily what they're doing, but it's the grassroots effort in Oregon for people to get out and change their state and make it look like them that I love. We're going to talk about the Greater Idaho movement. This would be the move to move the border of Oregon. And we're going to talk to Matt in just a second here. He can kind of go through some of the old, just so you guys understand what's happening. But there's a real push in Oregon to look at change. Redrawing lines is not impossible. It's tough, but I think the bigger story behind all of it is why. Why do people in Oregon, in rural Oregon especially, feel so disenfranchised that they want out? They don't want to leave Oregon, but they want their voice heard. And what's so funny or ironic or interesting, or maybe Governor Kotek, do you guys have a link to her? She should be watching this episode, because I think what she doesn't understand is every time I do a story on this or something about this, I get people from Albany, Claskenai, Hood River, other places that aren't in this geographical change boundary who say, please include me. So it's not necessarily as big about changing the border as it is about maybe the state of Oregon. And I also get a lot of comments from people, and please, go ahead and comment this if you want, but I'm going to take you down in comments if you do. The people from urban Oregon who say, well, if you don't like it, leave. No, if you don't like it, you leave. Because many of these people are ranchers and farmers and cattlemen and cattlewomen and loggers and professionals like that who have lived here for generations. And then you come here from another state. And believe me, I know how that is. I'm in Montana. I am very much aware, and I don't say much about what's going on around here. That's why I can complain about Oregon. So anyway, Matt's going to join us in a second. But first, we have to thank, as you can see up in the corner, Chris Dental. Dr. Bratlin is a great guy. He sponsors our show. He loves the fact that you guys are getting information and can talk about this kind of stuff. If you're looking for a dentist, now's the time to make an appointment, because as soon as school starts, they're bombarded with people because everybody thinks they got to get their kids' teeth. It's get your pencils, get your paper, and get your teeth cleaned. So you need to get in there and get working on that. So anyway, Dr. Michael Bratlin, there's all the information. And again, give him kudos because he cares about what you think. Matt McCaw, welcome to the show.
Good to be back, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I love talking about this because there's so many little intricate details that I think are just so wonderful about Oregon. And I love the fact that, people are able, and they still remember that they have the right and it's their voice to be heard. And so kind of where do this for me. Where's the latest in the movement? And then we'll go back and explain for people kind of what this would actually do or where we're at. So where are we at right now? Have you had a conversation? I know you've invited the governor many times. Have you had a conversation with her about what you're doing and why people are frustrated?
So we'll start there. Where are we right now? We have put the invitation out to the governor to meet with us at any time, any place. We had put this invitation out when she was doing her One Oregon tour right after she was elected. We were ignored. So we reissued a formal invitation, put it out on Twitter, sent it to her office, did everything we could to make sure she was aware that we wanted to meet with her. She actually replied, a reporter asked her about it, and she said that she was mulling it over, thinking about it, because she wasn't sure it would be a productive conversation. So we know that the governor is aware that we have the invite out there, but she has chosen not to do that, not to sit down with us. So where we're at right now, we've been doing this, Rick, now for 5 years. Our first votes came up in 2020, was when our first counties voted to have their elected leaders explore separating from Oregon and joining Idaho. So we've had 13 counties over those 5 years that have voted to want to explore joining Idaho and leaving Oregon. We've been in the state legislature twice in the long session. So 3 years ago in the long session, we had a bill that was ignored. It was only in the Senate side and it didn't go anywhere. We came back in this long session in the Oregon legislature. And this time when we came back, we had a bill on the Senate side. We had a bill on the House side. And our bill on the House side was co-sponsored by almost all of the representatives that represent Eastern Oregon. So as our movement's grown, when we started, most elected leaders didn't want to touch us. They didn't want to, they're just like, well, those crazy people that want to move the border, we don't want anything to do with them. But as time's gone by, as voters have made it clear that this is something they want to pursue, elected leaders are getting on board. So we had a bill on the House side that was co-sponsored by several Eastern Oregon legislators. On the Senate side, we had a bill that all of the Eastern Oregon senators wrote a letter asking Senate leadership to take up this bill, give it a hearing. Those two bills in the Democratic legislature went nowhere. They did not get hearings. They did not get work sessions. Myself and some other Greater Idaho leadership were in the Capitol advocating, meeting with legislators, advocating to get those bills moved. They were ignored. So 5 years, 13 counties, our elected representatives advocating for this in Salem, but the Democratic majority is refusing to meet with us, discuss this, and hear out the people of Eastern Oregon. That's where we're at right now.
So tell people what needs to happen in order, because one of the things I hear all the time is, and even from, lawmakers that I respect and stuff, well, that's not going to happen. And they almost just act like, what bothers me when I hear that, I guess, is all the thousands of people behind that they're not listening to. They're just going, dumb idea. We can't, you can't change lines. How do you think, Idaho and Montana, the way Idaho has the panhandle, as I've heard it, and I could be wrong and someone can correct me, but that was supposed to be more squared off. And, so Western Montana would have been part of Idaho if you look at how a line is actually drawn. So lines are moved and changed. And, the Oregon Territory, before it became Oregon, the state, was a whole chunk of all of this. So it's not, it's because we've gotten used to it, but it's not like it's impossible to do.
Absolutely. Borders have changed dozens of times. And even most recently in the state of Oregon, we changed our border with the state of Washington in 1958. It wasn't a huge adjustment, but it was an adjustment with the state of Washington through the interstate compact process, which is exactly what we're proposing here, is that any two states can change their state border as long as the two state legislatures agree to move the border to the new place. So the state of Idaho and the state of Oregon could come together, say, the people of Eastern Oregon are voting. They want to join our state. Let's move the border to where it makes sense that those people actually get the government that they want. And as long as the two state legislatures agree to do that, gets approved by Congress, that would change. And to that end, the state of Idaho is very supportive of having this conversation. So in 2023, when the Oregon legislature was completely ignoring us, the Idaho legislature was hearing us out. So we were in Boise and we were able to get passed in the House in Idaho a bill that invited the Oregon legislature to begin talks. Governor Brad Little has said he supports talks. So the state of Idaho is willing to have this conversation. They're willing to say, yeah, let's see if moving the border makes sense. Let's add these 400,000 extremely conservative rural people to our state, which is conservative and rural Idaho, and leave Oregon as Oregon, which is more left-leaning and more urban in the Willamette Valley. Let's move the border and match up people to government that they actually want and makes sense for their lives. And, you mentioned like some of the history. One of the things I don't think we've ever even talked about, Rick, is that the history of how Eastern Oregon got to be part of the state of Oregon in the first place is fascinating, and it's incredibly frustrating for those of us out here in Eastern Oregon.
Tell me, I want to know. This is good stuff.
Yeah. So at the very first Oregon Constitutional Convention, where they were trying to decide where to put the border. So you mentioned it. You had this huge Oregon territory that was Oregon, Washington, Idaho, parts of Montana, Wyoming, and all of Eastern Oregon was considered Wasco County at that point. But at the very first Constitutional Convention, there were 60 delegates from the territory that would become Oregon. 59 of those delegates were from Western Oregon, west of the Cascades. One delegate was from the east side of the Cascades. And that one delegate advocated for putting the border along the Cascade Mountain Range, because he said 168 years ago, the east side of the state is different than the west side. It always will be different because of geography, because of climate. And it doesn't make sense for us to be grouped with the people in Western Oregon because our interests will not align long term. And he was exactly right. It's exactly the way people feel now. But just like today, those 59 delegates from the west side of the state said, we want to have a bigger footprint. We want the natural resources. We want the land of Eastern Oregon. And so they voted to put the border where it currently is, over the objections of the people that actually live in Eastern Oregon. So this is something that goes back to the very founding of our state, and it has never made sense to have the border where it is. It was a mistake 168 years ago. It's still a problem today, but it is something that we can fix.
I have never heard that before.
Yeah, most people don't. Most people in Oregon have no idea because, that was a long time ago. Nobody alive today was around for that. And you have to go digging, through the old newspaper articles from a long time ago to find out what happened. But it absolutely, that's the way it went down. And Eastern Oregonians have always thought it made sense to have the border along the Cascade Mountain Range because we're far more similar to Idaho in every way, climate, geography, economy, culture, than we are to Western Oregon.
So didn't you were telling me one time about a study that actually shows that Western Oregon would benefit by unloading you guys, by letting you off the hook and letting you join. There's actually, because people always go, I think it's an ego thing. Actually, people don't say that. I say that. I mean, it's like, if we lose part of Oregon, we've done a bad job. Well, you've done a bad job, which is why you're losing part of Oregon. You're not listening to the people who live there, which is why you would end up losing them.
Yeah, absolutely. So our proposal is a win-win. You just said it. Eastern Oregon, because we are more rural and rural economies don't tend to be as wealthy as urban economies, we are a drain on Western Oregon. Western Oregon sends tax dollars to Eastern Oregon. Now, at the same time that we're a drain on Western Oregon, we could join Idaho and not be a drain on Idaho. We would actually be a plus for the economy of Idaho because, like in everything else, Eastern Oregon counties are very similar to Idaho counties. So we're poorer than Western Oregon counties, but we're the same or more wealthy than Idaho counties. So it's a win-win. If you let Eastern Oregon join Idaho, it benefits Idaho, it benefits Western Oregon financially, and it benefits the people of Eastern Oregon. That is one of the huge pieces of our proposal that makes so much sense. The other piece is that Western Oregon is pretty left-leaning, and Western Oregon votes a certain way, and that's completely opposite of the way Eastern Oregon votes. So by letting Eastern Oregon go, Western Oregon would better be able to implement the policy that makes sense for the people of Western Oregon without the extremely conservative voters in Eastern Oregon putting up roadblocks, slowing things down. Most people understand that it doesn't make any sense for these two polarized groups that have very little in common and want completely different things for their communities to be forced into sharing a state government that they don't want to be sharing together anymore. It would be better for everybody to mutually separate and let Eastern Oregon go get their government from Idaho.
But if that played out, our Democrat legislators who redrew the district lines in all parts of Oregon have done exactly that. They're supposed to be like communities are in a district, and they've taken places like where I used to live and put it in with the University of Oregon, which country rural voters are not University of Oregon voters, to water down the vote. So I don't think this is, many people who object to this really care about what Eastern Oregon people say. Lauren up here was asking, and I don't know if you know this, but would that save on this whole ODOT problem that they're having in Oregon?
I don't know specifically for ODOT, but what I do know is that Eastern Oregon generates as much money with the mileage tax or more than what we use out here. People are always concerned about like, oh, Eastern Oregon's so big, there's so many roads to take care of, but there's a lot of trucking and inventory that goes across Eastern Oregon. So we generate as much in tax. We would not be a drain in that sense. I don't know specifically how that goes to ODOT, but ODOT is a great, there's a good example of a way that Eastern Oregon is getting poorly served by the state of Oregon. So the state of Oregon spends hundreds of millions of dollars on the things that the state of Oregon thinks is important, like homelessness, which is not a huge problem out here in Eastern Oregon, where it's very, very cold and we don't have big urban areas. So the state spends hundreds of millions of dollars on that, comes up short on Department of Transportation dollars, which is critical to Eastern Oregon. We get snow, we get ice, we need our roads tended over the winter. This isn't Western Oregon. You can't just drive through, like a heavy rainstorm. You can still drive through, and you get a lot of snow and ice over here. You have to be taking care of those roads, or else it shuts everything down. But of course, the state has said, we're going to spend all this money on our problems. We're going to shortchange ODOT. And, sorry, I guess we're just not going to be able to plow those roads like we used to out in Eastern Oregon. Just another example of how Eastern Oregon gets shafted by the decisions that are made at the state level.
Well, and culturally, I think during COVID, we saw how crazy and ridiculous it was when Governor Brown was mandating masks and stuff like this in Harney County, treating Harney County the same as Multnomah County and Lane County. So these hugely populated areas, it was a blanket, everybody does the same thing because we're all Oregonians, rather than looking at going, these are two very different worlds.
Absolutely. And most policy that makes sense for Western Oregon doesn't make sense for Eastern Oregon. And just about everything you go down the line, the people of Eastern Oregon vote a certain way. They want certain types of policy, and the people in Western Oregon vote just the opposite. But as long as Western Oregon is 91% of the population and we're 9%, it doesn't matter what we want. We will, always be ignored and always be a perpetual minority. And that is not the way our system was designed to be set up. Our system was designed to be set up for self-governance, government by consent of the people. And the people of Eastern Oregon are making it clear what they want, and they're not getting it. And it's because Western Oregon is refusing to let us go, refusing to have this conversation. Most people in America think that's wrong. That's not the way they think our system is set up, and neither do we.
I sometimes I wonder, just from covering stories for years in Eastern Oregon and the reaction from Western Oregon, is it seems like, the urban Knights in the western part of Oregon is real good at mandating rules and regulations for people in Eastern Oregon because they work in Western Oregon, but they have nothing to do. These people don't know how cattle are raised and grazed. They don't know how, a great example, and I think I've told you this one before, a rancher in Rome, Oregon, which is about as close to Idaho as you can be, next to Jordan Valley without being in it. And, they came out and told her she couldn't water her cattle in the Owyhee River anymore. And yet she goes to Portland to fight it and sees 30 miles of Willamette River encased in concrete and pollution and smell. And she says, and you people are going to come out to my land and tell me how to manage my river that my family's been ranching here for 150 years. That is just arrogance and snotty. And it the Steens Mountain, another great example, come in and force ranchers to sell their beautiful property for sagebrush. And everybody goes, well, you got 2 million acres of sagebrush. Well, yeah, but they had 200,000 acres of beautiful pasture and farmland that had belonged to their families forever. But it didn't matter because Western Oregon controlled the conversation, forced it, and that's not the way our society culture is supposed to operate. At least not as the way I learned it.
Absolutely. A lot of people in Western Oregon, and I don't blame people for this. And that's part of the thing, Rick, is that our movement has never been about like, oh, we just can't stand those Western Oregonians. We understand. I lived in the Portland metro area for 20 years. I grew up on the east side of the state. And I like a lot of people on the east side of the state, went to the west side for opportunity, ended up in Portland because that's where the economic opportunity was. So I understand the Portland metro area. I understand it's different than me. It's not my thing, but I also understand that it is. The vast majority of people in Multnomah County want the same thing. They vote the same way. They keep voting in the same things. I can think it's crazy, but that's what they want. And that's fine. Our movement has never been about, animosity. It's been about you don't understand us. You don't live here. You live hundreds of miles away. Most Western Oregonians live hundreds of miles away from us, do not understand our culture, our land, anything about Eastern Oregon other than that it's part of the state of Oregon. Just let us make the decisions that make the most sense for us. And that would be to get under a state government that does look like us, that does understand, has the same kind of economic issues, has the same cultural issues as we do, and that would be Idaho.
Well, because it's interesting too, is that, we spend so much time trying to be culturally aware, and and you guys, if Multnomah County votes in rules, for homelessness or something that you guys think are crazy, well, that's okay. That's you guys. You guys deal with it. Your majority did. But what happens now is the state mandates the same rules for all areas. And so you guys, where you don't agree with that, if you guys were of a different nationality and were living in Eastern Oregon, you'd probably get a lot more attention and people would revere your cultural differences. If you guys were a bunch of reservations out there, I bet they'd let you go and leave you alone. And it really is a different world. And I think, for the people that, and like I said, I grew up in Western Oregon. So that's, my family grew up in Eastern Oregon, and I have a real soft spot I've done stories for years. And some of my favorite interviews were hardcore Democrats who were saying, you guys aren't listening to us. We are a different kind of Democrat than you are, or we're a different kind of Republican than you are. Just let us be who we want to be. So we allow all other cultures to have their culture. But when it comes to this, we have a governor and legislators that won't even bridge that conversation. And that's the part that bugs me the most, So you have to have first both so the legislature has to agree on this and say, we'll have this conversation. And if it turned out to be like in the end, there was a vote, they'd have to vote to let my people go. I mean, is that ever?
Yeah, so it would not actually have to go to a popular vote. It has to be the legislature. Although one of the things that we have, so we've been spending 4 years in the Oregon legislature, and we've made a lot of progress in getting our own representatives to get on board now. So when we started this, our own representatives out here in Eastern Oregon were not real, quick to pick up and advocate for moving this idea forward. That has changed over 4 years. Our own representatives are now introducing bills, advocating in various ways to make this happen, still completely ignored by the Democratic, majority. So, we're starting to have that conversation internally. Is the Democratic majority ever going to entertain this conversation? And if not, if things don't change, and we see more openness to that, what alternatives do we have? Well, in the state of Oregon, we're fortunate that we do have a citizen-led petition, initiative system.
Oh, yeah.
We can create law through the citizen petition. So that could be an avenue where we circumvent the legislature through a statewide ballot measure. That's something that we're currently looking into, because we're starting to, we have presented a win-win proposal to the Democratic majority in Salem. And we have said, we're not going to take anything from you. It's going to be a benefit to you politically. It's going to be a benefit to you financially. And it's going to be a win-win for everybody involved. And they've said, not interested. We're not even going to have this discussion. Like I said, I was in Salem meeting with legislators, and I didn't have anybody on the left side of the aisle that said, yeah, you guys deserve to be heard. You guys deserve to have the right to choose what you want, which state you want to be part of. That was not something that was ever mentioned to us. It was all the reasons why we should, want to stay. So we may move forward and try to go around that. You could pass a statewide ballot measure that implements that as law that goes around the legislature. That could be a potential avenue. But yes, you're right in that the mechanism is two state legislatures agree to move the border. It's happened dozens of times. States have been created out of other states. Maine was created out of Massachusetts. West Virginia was created out of Virginia. Whole counties have moved from one state to another before. There's a long legal precedence for this and historical precedence. It's happened multiple times. It's not that it's not possible. It's not that it's not something that's been done and is doable. It's that the people that have the ability to make it happen are refusing to engage.
I want you to comment on this because I'm going to read. Jason Jameson is a friend of mine. I think he's still on city council in Coburg, Oregon. Eastern Oregon is a vital economic and cultural asset to the rest of the state. The amount of commerce, particularly freight and trucking, that Eastern Oregon generates is incredible. Losing that to Idaho would be incredibly economically damaging for the rest of the state. Also, Eastern Oregon is home to thousands of acres of pristine farmland and beautiful nature, which the state of Oregon would be very much poorer without, in every sense of the word.
Yeah. So economically, again, there's been an independent economic analysis done by a group out of Moscow, Idaho, that looked at what would happen for the state of Oregon if the Eastern Oregon counties left and went to Idaho. And what that showed is that economically, sure, you're going to lose GDP, but per capita, Western Oregon is going to get wealthier, not less wealthy, because Eastern Oregon is poorer than Western Oregon. So when you take that economic output from Eastern Oregon and you move it into Idaho, it makes the remaining economic output of Western Oregon higher per person. So economically, that's just not the case. Western Oregon, or what would remain as the state of Oregon, would be wealthier. As far as the farmland and that comment, Eastern Oregon, very little of Eastern Oregon is actually owned by the state of Oregon. So Eastern Oregon is about 50% federal lands, 48% private lands, and about 2% state-owned land. So there's this misconception that the state of Oregon owns the land. That's not true. The people of Eastern Oregon own the land, and the federal government owns, most of it as well. But if the people of Eastern Oregon who own the land do not want to be governed, the state of Oregon governs that land. But if the people who live here have decided that it's in our best interest and it's in our community's best interest to get our state level governance from a different state than the state of Oregon, we believe it should be the people in those communities making those decisions. And I understand, or we understand, that people in Western Oregon love to have Eastern Oregon. One of the comments we always hear is that, people love Oregon. I love Oregon. I've lived here my whole life. They love the diversity. Oh, you've got the Steens, you've got the gorge, you've got the coast, you've got the mountains, anything you could want, you've got in Oregon. It's such a diverse and beautiful state. And we get that, but that does not negate the fact that the people that actually live in Eastern Oregon, and that's what really matters, is the people that live in a place. The people who live here would prefer to get their state government and not be associated with Western Oregon anymore. And I understand there's a lot of people in Western Oregon that may not like to hear that, but that's the reality. And what it boils down to is, are we going to hold people captive against their will because we want to be able to claim them as part of our state? Or are we going to let the people that live in a place be the ones that decide what government they get and let them?
It's so selfish. You know what I mean? It's like, and what? So if you drive into Idaho and it's really the Steens Mountains now, you can't go visit it because it's not in your state. I think sometimes that's like having moved to Montana. Nobody here thinks that way. You know what I mean? It's vast, wide open. A trip to Wyoming is no big deal. And going over to Idaho from where I live, and it's like Oregon, it's kind of, it's a little, in my, I'm not putting this on you. It feels so arrogant. Like it doesn't matter if you people are unhappy and aren't being listened to. We have this dream about what Oregon is, and it's our idea. And screw you if you want to change it, because you guys if you add more people, we have more people on our side. So you don't get to have a voice. And that's how it feels to me, thinking if I lived in urban or rural Oregon, that it would be like, well, you guys you'll do what we ask you to do, as long as we can come over and bring our little 2.3 kayaks over for a weekend and spend time in your area. And then we'll come home and continue to tell you what to do. That is not America. That's not the United States. That's not the way our forefathers or foremothers designed this country to be. And it's disgusting that we have gotten to a point where I want that area on the weekend. If I can't go to Burns, Oregon, and it has to be Burns, Oregon instead of Burns, Idaho, then it's not going to happen. I mean, it's so freaking arrogant.
So much of that is so silly because, like you said,
It
it's not
is.
like anybody's going to put a wall up if all of a sudden burns Oregon.
We're going to have the Berlin Wall.
That's right. Like,
separating.
you know, and but again, Rick, this goes back to the very beginning of this state. You know, people should go to our website, greateridaho.org, and we have a great article that was written by one of our supporters in Wallowa County, Alicia Zinni, and she wrote up a really great, you know, summary of how this state came to be. And one of the things she says at the very end is so true, is that Eastern Oregon is basically a pawn of Western Oregon. Western Oregon wanted Eastern Oregon, didn't matter what the people of Eastern Oregon thought or wanted for themselves. Western Oregon had the population to force us into association with them. And you get the same thing today. 168 years later, you hear the same thing that, you know, we don't care what you want. You're part of you're grouped with us, whether you like it or not. And it is wrong. And most people believe it's wrong. And when polling has been done and asked, even Western Oregonians, if people in Eastern Oregon vote to leave, should we let them go? More people think that the state should let us go than don't. And so, you know, it is an idea that still, even with all the things that we disagree on in our culture between left and right, most Americans still believe that people should have a right to choose their own governance. And if they're unhappy with the governance they have, they should have a right to change that.
So Jackie up here earlier asked, how come, and I think I know the answer, but I want you to answer this. How come you can't just split the state in half and have Eastern Oregon as a state and Western Oregon as a state?
So we could, and the process is very, very similar as to the process of joining another state. So the process to create your own state is the state legislature has to allow that portion of the state to separate, and then it has to get approved by Congress. Now, the problem with creating a new state is that creates two new state senators or federal senators, and we have, we thought that would be a problem. But like, if you're going to get congressional approval, as polarized as we are, and as much money and conflict comes at the federal, blue versus red team, the idea of adding two new Republican senators to the federal government to represent 400,000 people, we just thought there's no way Congress would ever approve that. Part of the beauty of moving a state border is it only affects one elected federal representative. That's Representative Bentz, and who already represents Eastern Oregon, already a Republican. That federal representative would go from the state of Oregon to the state of Idaho. That is likely to happen anyways. Oregon is likely, if you look at the forecasts, is likely to lose the electoral vote they just got, because we're losing population because people are unhappy with the governance. And so when they redistrict and do the census in 2030, all the forecasts that are out there are already forecasting Oregon is going to lose that electoral vote we just got with the extra district. So there would essentially be no federal impact as far as the Electoral College goes or federal representation. And that's why moving the state line just makes so much more sense than trying to create a new state.
I have a comment for Online Brown. You say Oregonian here. I do not condone this. What my response, just my gut response is, who gives a shit? And then you say native Oregonian. And I would also utter the same response, because once somebody, this is what I've learned about Montana too. Once you decide a state is your state, it's your state. Doesn't matter if you were born there or not, you have chosen to live there. It's kind of like adoption. When you pick a child, isn't that even more special than just kind of, doing it the old fashioned way where all this, it's your offspring, but you're picking it. So you're choosing to live there. But when you go to a new state, you assimilate. We've lost that whole idea of assimilation. When you come to a new country, we don't change the country to be like you change to be like the country. So that's what my wife and I have had to do in Montana. It's a very different culture here, and we bite our tongue quite a bit, and we have learned to love the way it is. I do miss things about Oregon, and I'm a native Oregonian, but you have no more special right to condone this idea, Online Brown, or to not condone it. And then Laura, I'll let Matt, you come to this one. Yeah, they've tried this umpteen times for the state of Jefferson. Didn't happen. If people would spend more time trying to ban vote by mail and clean up the voter rolls, deport illegals, Now that would indeed make a huge difference. Otherwise, splitting the state is just a clever distraction. Where do you live, Laura? I'd really like to know what Albany, Salem, Portland, Clascani. That would be interesting to see where people are coming from. What I find kind of the most sad on here, Matt, of the comments, is all the people in different areas that aren't in your target audience, like the coast, people coming on here from the Oregon coast saying, I wish we could go with you. Coming back to my point, we have a real problem in the state of Oregon when so many people are pretty desperate not to leave. They're desperate to be heard. And you have a supermajority legislature, one party rule, and a governor who has no reason to have to listen to anybody. And this is, I wrote this blog today about that, we need a giant shakeup. And this would definitely shake things up if people, could you imagine how excited Eastern Oregonian people would be if they had control of their own destiny, not having the valley continue? They'd probably have to get therapy and have some PTSD at the end.
Well, Rick, one of the things about this, Laura is right in that this does come up, and there's a long history of these sorts of things coming up, where you have these movements that crop up because it's a byproduct of the polarization in the fact that we just really want different things. The Portland metro area is so different than Eastern Oregon and different than Southern Oregon. And you get, downstate out of the Willamette Valley. And the people in the rest of the state are Oregonians, but they don't want the same things for their communities as the Portland metro area does. And so it would be the exact same thing in reverse. People talk about, I'm all for the vote by mail thing that's they're trying to get on the ballot, and we're very supportive of that. We want clean elections. People in I think conservative people in general, but especially in Eastern Oregon, have lost confidence in the security and truthfulness of our elections. We want honest elections. We want only citizens voting and all those things. But even if all those things happen, and even if we talk about this, if Christine Drazen would have won, and we had a three-way race, and it was basically two Democrats and a Republican, and the Tina Kotek still won. But if Christine Drazen would have won that election and become governor of the state of Oregon, we would have had the same problem that we have, but it would have been in reverse. The Portland metro area is not going to be okay with a Republican governor coming in and saying, okay, now we're going to get rid of sanctuary state status. We're going to open carry, Second Amendment everywhere you go. We're going to restrict abortions. You're going to have problems because the Portland metro area is 2.5 million people that don't want that for their communities. Right. So we can either play this game where it's just you spend millions of dollars to get in charge and force your way of life and your policy on people that don't want it, which is a recipe for conflict. Mm-hmm. And it's what we've had for the last, as long as I've been alive. And you keep doing it this way, that's what you're going to get moving forward. Or you can look at reality and say, hey, the Portland metro area wants very, very different things than the rest of the state. So let's come up with a solution where the Portland metro area voters get the policies they want and the rest of the state gets the policy they want. And then everybody's happy and there's no conflict. And it's a peaceful political solution. That's what our solution is. It's one of the reasons why people are so excited about it and vote for it, is because we're not trying to harm anybody. We're not trying to force anything on anybody. We're just saying, let us go get policy that makes sense for us. And that's the kind of solutions we need. We need in this country more peaceful political solutions, not I'm going to get in charge and force my way of life on you and you're going to take it.
Yeah, I think if anybody thinks that this would be any different with a Republican supermajority, which is just as dangerous as a supermajority of Democrats, you're crazy. The problem isn't each party. The problem really is not listening and giving people autonomy. I mean, that's what this country is about. We're supposed to be able to, we the people are supposed to decide. I do have to smile. My favorite comment so far is Steve Tucker says, apparently Oregon Democrats are really not pro-choice. Stephen, you get the comment of the day. That makes me just smile and laugh. But again, it's not just a Democrat problem. There's a lot of Democrats in Eastern Oregon, old time Democrats who are about leave me alone, let me we're so confused now. They would be still driving a Volvo that said, don't trust the government, with bumper stickers that said big farmers bad and all that. Now those are Republicans.
Yeah. The problem in our state is just that we're so different. The Willamette Valley and the Portland metro area in particular is just so different than the rest of the state. And that's what really causes all this conflict, is that you have a state of 4 million people, and 2.5 million of those people live in one place that has really radically different values than the rest of the state. And those are the people in charge. They've used their political power to ensure that they have the political power moving forward. They've gerrymandered districts so that we have supermajorities in the legislature, and we have, out of our 6 congressional districts, 3 of them reach into Portland and grab, the bluest of areas to ensure that the congressional district, which comes across the mountains and grabs Bend, they've used the tools that they can to cement their political power instead of trying to figure out a way to actually allow for better representation. And that's what causes the conflict. We got to separate these two groups, or find a solution that allows the two groups to have the autonomy you're talking about. One of the things that's been talked about, and is an idea that has been thrown around in other states as well, because we're not the only state that has this problem. Washington has the exact same situation that we do, divided by the Cascade Mountains. Western Washington, very, very left-leaning, very liberal, dominated by King County, Seattle. You get out into Eastern Washington, rural, conservative, but they get all sorts of policy forced on them they don't want. So one of the things that they're considering up there, that was introduced by a representative up there, Rob Chase, was the idea of an autonomous zone, creating autonomous regions within a state. What they proposed up in Washington is that Eastern Washington is one autonomous region, and then Western Washington is the other, and that those autonomous regions would replace state government for the vast majority of the functions that government provides. That's an idea. It's not been passed anywhere. Legislation has been introduced in places like New York for the same sort of thing, because they have the same problem. New York City is vastly different than upstate New York. They want different things. So there are other ideas out there. You could have an autonomous region that represented Eastern Oregon, that allowed Eastern Oregonians to make rules and laws for Eastern Oregon, and an autonomous region of Western Oregon, and take a lot of that power away from the state level and give it more locally. But again, nobody's actually pushing these things forward. Our politicians, our elected leaders, seem very content to just stay in the model that they have, which is, if we're in power and in control, we're going to do everything we can to cement that control, and we really don't care about hearing from anybody else.
Isn't it interesting that we're coming to this place where, maybe the turmoil and stuff is good, that it's pushing people to the point, because I think for so long, a lot of people have been very apathetic. Oh, I don't do politics. Oh, I don't listen to that. Well, you got to be involved. I'm not saying you have to sit and listen to every political thing that goes on, because that'll drive you crazy, but you have to be somewhat involved, because we're being pushed. And I think you're seeing, we're already seeing this right now. I've seen some critics on here of me moving to Montana from Oregon. Well, I'm doing this show, huh? See, I have this audience, and I reach 3 million people a month just on Facebook. So I can still stir up all the shit I want and get Oregon and talk about Oregon and try to help her, but I don't have to live in the pain. If you guys are there, then you have been chosen to stay there and live and work it out there. But there's a lot of people, when I write stuff from all over the country, that are from Oregon, saying, go get them. We want Oregon to get straightened out. We just can't live there. So some of you can put up with more than the rest of us can. But the bottom line is, we're seeing people move to red areas, or areas that for people that more like what they believe. And now maybe it's just getting to a point where, the states and these other little disagreement things are going to have to be taken care of. I like the autonomous idea, where Eastern Oregon would have the say over how they're operated, and Western Oregon would have another say. I really think that has some legs too. I mean, I just like the fact that people are starting. Look at, there's 150 some people. It's been up to 170 coming on and commenting, and they're really, I mean, if the governor is not paying attention to this, you are more naive than I ever had thought you were, because this is the response here is huge. People are upset. They want change. It's not even, they're not mad at anything. They just want to be heard. I mean, that's why we live in America. If I wanted to not be heard, I'd go move to the Soviet Union or Venezuela or, Mexico or something. But I want my voice to be heard, and you're trying to provide them with a way. So if, let's just say, both legislatures come together, say this is okay, then do the senators have a vote in that too, or congressional people, or does it just have?
So the U.S. Congress would have to approve. So the process, the two state legislatures. So say that our Democratic legislators decided, you know what, we're going to respect the people of Eastern Oregon and just give them their wishes. We're going to let them go. They've said they want to leave. We're going to let them go. We're going to move the border to where we think it makes sense. Along the Cascade Mountain Range outside of the Warm Springs Reservation, and then Bend, because those are left-leaning populations that want to stay in the state of Oregon. So if those two legislatures came together, it would go to Congress. Interstate compacts go to Congress all the time. The vast majority of interstate compacts are approved by Congress, because there's really very little reason for Congress to say no to something. If a red state and a blue state, Idaho and Oregon, come together and say, we want to move the borders for the betterment of the 6 million people that are represented by our two states, it's going to be better for everybody to do that. Very little reason for Congress to step in and say no. So the real hurdle, and we've always known this was going to be the hurdle, was getting the Oregon legislature to let us go. That's where we're stuck right now. We've gotten the approval from the people. We've gone to the people of Eastern Oregon and asked them, and they have told us at the ballot box, which is the most, we didn't just poll. We didn't just say, we think people want this. We asked them in elections, and they've told us what they want. So we know what the people of Eastern Oregon want. We know that Idaho is a willing partner. We're stuck because Oregon won't let us go.
Okay, so Iris is a big fan of mine, and I use that tongue in cheek. This is a pipe dream. Rick Dancer, Greater Idaho will never come to fruition. Here's why. It cost Idaho taxpayers billions of dollars to accomplish Greater Idaho. Oregon's real estate alone is worth several $billion. In addition, the counties Idaho would gain have higher poverty levels, higher unemployment rates, and lower economic output that requires extensive state subsidies, meaning Idahoans' taxes are likely to go up and services are likely to diminish. Go for it.
Well, so Iris is just wrong on the facts on those, unfortunately.
That surprises me greatly.
So there's been an independent economic analysis, and what it showed is that if Eastern Oregon counties joined with Idaho, it would actually be a plus for Idaho tax coffers. And again, this goes back to, if you compare Eastern Oregon counties to Western Oregon counties, we are less wealthy than Western Oregon counties. But if you compare us to Idaho counties, we're very, very comparable. And the other thing about that is that Idaho, the people of Eastern Oregon never voted for all these extensive social services that the state of Oregon provides. The people of Eastern Oregon are very conservative, and they have a tendency to vote for very conservative policies, lower taxes.
They take care of their communities, and when people are hurting, they take care of it.
Right. So Idaho is a state that has much lower levels of social services like that, much lower taxes. I just saw in a letter that one of our followers shared with me from Representative Benz, where he was talking about education funding. Education funding is a perfect example. State of Idaho only provides, $7,500 per student, whereas the state of Oregon provides $12,000. Now, the state of Idaho gets better results from their $7,500 than Oregon does with their $12,000. But that's just an example of when Eastern Oregon counties would go join Idaho. Those are the kinds of policies that Eastern Oregonians have been voting for all along. Is less taxes, smaller government. So it wouldn't be a drain on Idaho. It would benefit Western Oregon. And when you talk about the real estate that Oregon owns in Eastern Oregon being worth billions of dollars, that's just simply not true. the state of Oregon owns very, very little land out here. The little bit of land that they do own are either nature preserves or range land, which is worth very little. There's no reason to think that it would cost Idaho anything to take in the Eastern Oregon counties. Because remember, Rick, and this is another thing that people get confused about. The people of Eastern Oregon make up 9% of the population in Oregon. We've been paying taxes, 9%.
Okay.
It's 63% of the land mass, but it's only 9% of the population. But the 9% of people out here have been paying taxes to the state of Oregon our entire lifetimes. The state facilities that are in Eastern Oregon were paid for by the people of Eastern Oregon. So it's not like Idaho is going to have to buy the local ODOT building. That should go with the people who paid for it, that it serves. Right. And that's part of the whole process that would be decided. Okay, what is going to transfer from Oregon to Idaho, and what assets are going to go? But the people of Eastern Oregon are 9% of the state's population. They should have the right to 9% of the assets of the state that they've been paying for our entire lives. It's not like people of Eastern Oregon have to walk away from the state with nothing in their hands. So that's a misnomer. The state of Idaho would not have to pay billions and billions and billions of dollars to take in Eastern Oregon. There's no reason to think that it would cost them anything.
So Iris, just to you personally, because I'm going to call you out just because I'm so aware of your following me so closely, and you always have things to say about your facts. I would suggest that you get your facts straight before you come on and start blasting publicly your ignorance. And I'm sure that has something to do with your last name being demented. Okay, so let's see what else we have on here. That's the fun I get to have, because she comes on all the time. Whatever it is, comes on all the time, and blah 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 blah. And to have somebody that can just throw the facts right there, I love that.
Well, and I will say too, it is. People should go to our website and look at that economic analysis. There is a lot of details that people don't understand, and even what we were just talking about, people don't think of the fact they think Oregon owns all this land in Eastern Oregon. They don't. It's not. The state of Oregon governs it. They don't own it. I own my land. My friends that have ranches, they own that land. Right. The state of Oregon doesn't own it. Idaho's not going to have to buy that from Oregon. It's just they're going to start governing it is all. So there is a lot of things that are confusing and people get confused about, but there have been studies done. That data is out there for people that want to go find it.
And Cheating Death, you're saying it's disgusting how many people give up on Oregon, the whole state, and the people. These aren't people. These people have been given up from the beginning. If you go back to the website, like Matt was saying, and find out this is how it's always been, and they're tired of it. So I don't know where you live, but maybe, you got to think about other people. And that's the attitude that bothers me. It's like, people are not giving up on Oregon. They're giving up on the rulers of Oregon, and they just want their voice. I would bet you most of the people in Eastern Oregon who are longtime folks, because a lot of new people just don't move to Eastern Oregon. They're going to move to the Valley. Mm-hmm. So the people that who live there, they would probably shed more tears than you would when they had to leave. It's a state. They'd still have their property. It's the same place, but they would be heartbroken because they had to leave Oregon. But that's what you do for freedom when you need to have your voice heard. And I think that's what sometimes people in Western Oregon forget. This is their land. This is where their people are from. And they love Oregon just as much as you. You don't love it any more than they do. They're just the ones that don't get listened to. So you're loving it and you get listened to. They're loving it and they're treated like shit. So there's a big difference between leaving a bad situation or a bad marriage and somebody who's gotten all the benefits and then goes, well, how dare you leave Oregon? That isn't fair. And that makes me absolutely want to puke. But that's just me personally.
Well, I agree with you, Rick. We have people here who've had ranches in their family for generations. These are our communities. And when people talk about giving up on Oregon, we don't want to leave our communities. I was just talking to my neighbor this morning, and she's just sick about all the stuff that happens in Oregon. She was talking about the ridiculous waterway permits. Now, you got to pay a tax and get a permit to take your paddleboard out with your kid. It's ridiculous. But anyways, But she was saying, like, we love our communities. I love my community. I love my town. I love my church. I love my kids' school. we're fighting for those. We're
Yes.
fighting to keep those the communities they are without Portland progressive policy coming in and destroying them. And that's not giving up on Oregon. That's saying, I understand that Oregon represents Multnomah County. It represents the Portland metro area and the values of the Portland metro area. It does not represent Eastern Oregon values. And yet those Portland values are being pushed into my community and destroying that community. It's not giving up on Oregon. It's saying I need to detach myself from people whose values are radically different and they have power over my community to impose things on us that we don't want.
Yeah. And it's fairness. And so here's my, now I love this. This is the most interesting topic. I am going to go home. You know what? You gave me cocktail conversation. When I have a beer tonight, I'm going to sit down to my wife and say, did you know that when the state was formed and they were drawing the lines, that is the most interesting thing. It's almost like it's I don't want to say spiritual, but it's like it's a torment that's been on Oregon this whole time. And this is the one thing that could actually resolve that problem. I think all the other stuff is just BS. But if you guys get an initiative petition, how likely are you to get some of these people? You know, I mean, how hard is that going to be to sell to people to say you're giving up, because they're in their eyes, you're giving up some of your state.
Yeah.
That's a big.
So we're exploring lots of different options. Statewide ballot measures are incredibly expensive and time consuming. And they're a big uphill battle. There's been polling done on Western Oregon, and we know that more Oregonians in Western Oregon, the polling that's been done has been done in Western Oregon. We know that more Oregonians in Western Oregon support allowing Idaho or Eastern Oregon to join Idaho than don't support it. So how that would play out once you get into an actual campaign and there would be millions and millions of dollars pouring in, trying to keep us from leaving. We don't know exactly how that would play out. We're looking at all those options. The best option would be just for the Oregon legislature to actually listen to the people of Eastern Oregon and advocate and let us go. A next best option, we've reached out to the president. Eastern Oregon voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. Eastern Oregon is more conservative than the state of Idaho as a whole. We were like a 70% plus across all of our counties for Donald Trump. These are some of his most ardent supporters in the country. And we've asked him to get involved and to help us, and asked his administration to step in. The state of Oregon gets billions and billions of dollars from the federal government. The federal government has leverage over the state to bring the state to the table, bring Governor Kotek and the Democrat majority in the legislature to the table and talk about letting these folks, our folks, join Idaho. So, that would be one way that we can move forward. But right now, we actually just put out a survey to our supporters, and because at our core, our movement, Rick, I was never involved in politics. I only got involved with this movement because I heard the idea and I was like, man, that's such a good idea.
Yeah.
I want to be involved with that. I think this would solve problems. This would be a peaceful political solution for this longstanding problem that we've had out here in Eastern Oregon. We've always been a grassroots-driven organization. So we're going back to our supporters and asking them, how do you want us to move forward? Do you want us to keep moving like we are, just keep working with the legislator? Do you want to, pursue a statewide ballot initiative? What's our next steps to get better governance for the people of Eastern Oregon, which is what this is all about.
Matt, how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can reach us through our website at greateridaho.org. There's a, contact us, and they can follow us on Twitter or Facebook and all those normal ways. Get signed up for our email list. That's the best way. We send out an update, every month to really know what's going on in our movement and what the latest is, get signed up for our email list.
All right, buddy. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time. That was so interesting. I have a good time every time I talk to you, but I think, you're the real deal. And I think this could get some people, my goal is as yours is just to let, I don't care what they do, but people should have the right to govern themselves. We don't need to be ruled. Remember, we have no kings and no queens. And if you're a true Oregonian, you should believe that it is a citizen-driven state. And when you drive citizens away, that's not the same thing. Matt McCaw,
Thank you, Rick.
Idaho movement.
Good to
Thanks,
see you.
buddy. See you
Yeah.
later. So there you go, guys. Yeah, I know some of you don't agree and some of you agree, and and that kind of thing. But listen, we all want the same thing for Oregon. It's fairness, freedom, and people should have their voice. And if anything is getting in the way of that, it should be stopped. And as Matt was saying, go back and look at that history. So one legislator was trying to get Eastern Oregon to have a different boundary. And I can't remember what the number was, 69 or 59 others kept it from happening. That's the history of Oregon. That's not fair. And it's been going on for 150 years or whatever. So isn't it time to make Oregon great again? Make Oregon fair? I think so. Do you guys realize right now, the pressure's on everything. We're being called out to be truthful and honest and upfront and make changes that are hard. And it's scary for people, but this is how you get change. I personally think it's exciting, but if you're one of the people, you are giving up part of a state, you're calling it in Idaho. Cheating death, you got to get out of your head. Oregonians are independent people. We don't want people telling us what to think. But if you're afraid to think outside the box, you're kind of a lousy Oregonian in my book. Mark, clean up the voter rolls. I 100%. In fact, you've had a lot of good ideas. I've been reading them, and I really appreciate your comments and stuff. Okay, so that's it. You guys, if you enjoyed this, share it on your page. Share it to your friends. It's on YouTube. If you want to share it on your websites or something, if it's just on Facebook, share it from Facebook to your friend's Facebook or to your page. This is how change happens. If you're sitting around with your finger up your butt, nothing's going to happen, and you are part of the problem. If you're just going to downplay everything and use your fake facts, Iris, and come up with what you believe to be true, go do your frickin' homework before you go blabbing your mouth around. That's why they call it Get Real with Rick Dancer, because that's as real as it gets.